Dark Souls is a truly timeless and legendary fantasy game where there are no easy answers. And it's also a game where there are always dumb ways to die. Now, full disclosure / confession before we get started. I love From Software's Dark Souls. I don't know if anyone in my audience is aware of this fact, judging by the recent output of shorts on this channel. Yes, I occasionally put out shorts on this channel for projects I am working on, and or short clips from longer projects. There's your plug. But I love revisiting and replaying Dark Souls and starting a new game, or maybe a new game plus in my free time. Whether it's as a sorcerer, warrior, pyromancer, or even a thief. And while I can't give you a reliable opinion on the game's controversial performance on the Nintendo Switch or 2, Dark Souls runs great on the Steam Deck, and hopefully just the same, if not better on the Steam Machine. Damn, that is such a good console name, the Steam Machine! Anyway, the original Dark Souls, and just to be clear for the inevitable comments going to tell me this footage is not from the Prepare to Die edition, no, I don't think it makes much difference to play the original versus remastered editions, apart from aesthetic differences like the font size or fog wall graphics. I'm not here to convince you to scavenge for a PS3 somewhere at your local game store or on the internet, but regardless, Dark Souls, whichever version you choose, is a game which really takes a long time to love, in my opinion, and the same is true for the game's 2 sequels, Dark Souls 2 and 3, as well as From Software's other games, such as the original Demon's Souls, one of the most beautiful games to ever be released, and Dark Souls' spiritual predecessor, you know, because of that whole copyright thing with PlayStation. The most obvious reason for why this is because while playing Dark Souls for the first time, you might be thinking that this is going to be another adventure game, until fighting the very first boss makes the gamer realize this is not going to be a semi-cozy walk in the park like, say, The Elder Scrolls Oblivion, where for all of its faults, at least provides a little more freedom for the gamer to decide how to venture out, at least on first playthrough. Not only that, but as a tradition of the Soulslike genre of gaming, every time your chosen undead character dies, you lose your souls, which you get from killing enemies and or picking them up and using them, and which serves as the game's currency for buying equipment and leveling up your soul level. And though the gamer has a chance to retrieve their lost souls, as well as their humanity, while trying to get back to their bloodstain, dying in between, say, platforming through Blighttown or trying to run through these 2 annoying Silver Knight archers in Anor Londo could mean losing a lot of souls forever. And thus, Dark Souls forces the gamer to resist the temptation to throw their hands up and quit, to move forward and get disciplined or get done! Until they utilize the strengths of their character build and use them to defeat the game's hollowed enemies and bosses, even if some bosses might take a little more time with certain character builds than others. Sure, a warrior build could mean leveling up on strength and vitality, but what if you don't have enough endurance to roll past the skeleton warriors blocking the path to the catacombs? And maybe a sorcerer build is great for long distance attacks in early boss fights, but what can the player do once they realize Seath the Scaleless is not as vulnerable to some of the magic spells you pick up or buy? Of course, completing Dark Souls on one go-around necessitates another more difficult playthrough, or maybe starting a new game altogether to try another character build. Hence, New Game Plus mode allows gamers to play through every boss in the game, and with increased difficulty and perhaps finding new creative ways to plow through the game's enemies. And, as you can tell from the title, this video essay covers just one boss fight, my experience with the fight, as well as critiquing a few notable YouTubers fighting him, and whether one way or another to beat them is the quote-unquote right way. There will be major spoilers from this point on regarding the final boss fight in Dark Souls and some of its lore implications. While this video essay assumes a large portion of Dark Souls gamers already know what I'm talking about, all I can say for those having not played it yet is that you really should get the chance to try it out. Hell, why not try Dark Souls 2 and 3 while you're at it? Anyway, let's begin. There are many reasons gamers like to play, replay, and revisit the original Dark Souls, as stated in the first chapter, but one other primary reason gamers find Dark Souls to be a memorable game are the various boss fights, which at first playthrough might be frustrating to try for the first time, since defeat is inevitable. But eventually, and for maybe a few hours or days, the player may progress onto the next area, and or level up their soul level with increasingly large amount of souls gained from each boss fight. In New Game Plus mode and so on, and with enough upgrades and buffs having been bought or picked up, bosses like the Asylum Demon and Taurus Demon, while being intimidating for some gamers new to Dark Souls, can be just one airdrop from being defeated with and without a buffed up sword. For sorcerers, stocking up on powerful spells like Darkbeat and Pursuers in the Autoras of the Abyss DLC means other early game bosses like Mothwing Butterfly or Sif can be defeated in mere seconds, though I admit I always hated the delay in certain spells in the first game, unlike the earlier part of a sorcerer run in Dark Souls 2, where spells like Soul Arrow can come out instantaneously. Nevertheless, no matter if you're a Dark Souls novice or playing New Game Plus, you know that the game builds up the legend and myth of the God of Sunlight, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the game's final boss.
Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. With the strength of lords, they challenge the dragons. Gwyn's mighty bolts peeled apart their stone scales.
A massive lord with a white beard and long hair, like Santa Claus if he trained hard, Gwyn is mentioned in various parts of the game, as well as having two statues depicting him with his hands resting on his Great Lord Greatsword. Get it? They rhyme! As he towers over you in the Dark Moon Tomb in Andorlando, where there's a bonfire. Or is it a statue? And there's the one looking at you getting killed again and again in the infamous arena where you fight Ornstein and Smough. Looking at these statues after making progress in Andorlando, the player might get the impression that the Lord of Cinder might be the most formidable, intimidating force they will have to deal with in the entire game. I mean, the game's DLC might say otherwise. Besides the prologue, which tells the gamer the events prior to the chosen undead escaping the undead asylum, we get small glimpses as to whom Gwyn is when talking to King Seeker Frump, a primordial serpent, after he emerges in Firelake's shrine, and how he views Gwyn as a quote-unquote friend.
I am the primordial serpent, King Seeker Frump, close friend of the great Lord Gwyn, chosen undead. Your fate is to succeed the great Lord Gwyn, so that you may link the fire, cast away the dark, and undo the curse of the undead.
Frump being a majestic, though sometimes aloof friend of Gwyn at first appearance, he doesn't speak of the death of the Lord of Cinder with boast, but as a necessity to maintain the Age of Fire, and to break the undead curse.
Magnificent! You are the righteous successor to Gwyn, the new great lord, and I am King Seeker no more. Your acquaintance was an honor. I must admit, I am fond of you humans. May you enjoy serendipity, and may the Age of Fire perpetuate.
What some Dark Souls gamers might miss on first playthrough, however, is that there are details Frump may have fibbed about, as there is another primordial serpent the player could encounter without placing the Lord Vessel, Darkstalker Koth, leader of the Dark Wraith Covenant who you could meet in the Abyss after fighting the Four Kings.
After the advent of fire, the ancient lords found the three souls, but your progenitor found a fourth, unique soul, the Dark Soul. Your ancestor claimed the Dark Souls and waited for fire to subside, and soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained. Thus began the Age of Men, the Age of Dark. However, Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark, clinging to his Age of Fire, and in dire fear of humans, and the Dark Lord who would one day be born amongst them. Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature by sacrificing himself to link the fire and commanding his children to shepherd the humans. Gwyn has blurred your past to prevent the birth of the Dark Lord. I am the primordial serpent. I seek to right the wrongs of the past, to discover our true lord. But the other serpent, Frampt, lost his sense and befriended Lord Gwyn. Undead warrior, we stand at a crossroads. Only I know the truth about your fate. You must destroy the fading Lord Gwyn, who has coddled fire and resisted nature, and become the fourth Lord, so that you may usher in an age of dark.
Koth might call himself the Primordial Serpent, but both of the Primordial Serpents are shown to be liars and unreliable, with perhaps Frampt being the worst of the two, as he's blinded by his friendship with Gwyn in the Link the Flame ending.
Forgive me.
It almost makes it seem like Frampt is aloof in his deception. Even in the Dark Lord ending, Frampt is name-dropped as one of the serpents who will serve the Dark Lord.
Let Koth and Frampt serve your highness.
Yet Koth, while presenting an alternate explanation for why Lord Ron and a large portion of its people have gone hollow, he too is deceptive, and even worse, manipulative. I mean, this is the same serpent whose followers are Darkwraiths stealing humanity in the New Londo ruins, and had a hand in the downfall of
Elysium.
And even if Koth was seriously thinking about what's best to bring in the Age of Man, who is to say this new age would be best for humanity's sake, and for the world of Lord Ron?
You are the true Lord of Men, the Dark Lord. Now go forth and rid us of that enfeebled Gwyn. I, Koth, shall await you here.
Regardless of whether you want to take Koth or Fram's side, and I am not here to tell you which ending is correct, though canonically, linking the flame makes more sense in Dark Souls 1 and 2, the final boss is waiting for you at the end of the trail at the Kiln of the First Flame, which either Koth or Frampt bring you down to after you've collected the 4 souls from Seath the Scaleless, Gravelord Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and the 4 Kings. Yet, despite the build-up leading to this final battle, in the end, Gwyn, while tall, quick, and intimidating upon fighting him at first, doesn't have any powers apart from his damaging explosive grab attack and his burning greatsword. Lame that you can't even power the sword up with miracles after. He doesn't even use his sunlight spears which helped to defeat the dragons long before the game's events. Instead, if you had been paying attention to the various attacking behaviors of the Hollows during the first stage of the game, as well as some of the game's dialogue, Gwyn let his fear of the dark overtake him, because in the end, he's nothing more than a Hollow himself when you finally approach him. Unpredictable, yet erratic and without thought. So putting aside this brief detour into lore, what is the point of this video at all? Well, let me explain the motivation behind making this short essay. There's this one YouTuber I occasionally watch by the name of Uggles, who's like the Bob Ross of Soulsborne gaming, except if Bob Ross lived in Tennessee and was like the calmest gamer on YouTube, maybe even the planet. Anyway, Uggles does video tutorials on how to quote-unquote cheese video game bosses, and, like me, has an appreciation for From Software games, including Dark Souls, and he's got a playlist on his channel on how to cheese Dark Souls bosses. For example, say you want to shoot arrows at Artorias or Manus and not go fight them in their respective arenas, or maybe even Black Dragon Calamide, though I don't think it will ever be possible to truly cheese Calamide. However, there was this one video Uggles did showing how to cheese Gwyn to complete his Dark Souls cheese series, and it was interesting because it was completely not what I had expected before clicking the video, because Uggles, with his chosen undead having a pyromancy build, outright says no parrying is involved in the fight, nor does he use any swords. Rather, he runs away from Gwyn, glitches in this corner of the arena, then throws great chaos fireballs at him before Gwyn catches up. Then Uggles gets glitched out of that spot, moving down and proceeds to shoot arrows at Gwyn, while he's stuck in the spot Uggles was before until the Lord of Cinder dies a long, arrowy death. It's an admittedly convenient way to deal with Gwyn without risking any, if at all, damage, and especially for those who are just trying to finish the game as soon as possible without the need to speedrun. But it got me thinking, is this the quote-unquote right way to fight Gwyn? Let's observe further and critique some other game footage from several notable larger YouTubers as examples for how they managed to finish the game. Starting with Hunger Games cast member Charlie White, aka Moist Critical, aka Penguins Zero. Charlie White is the whitest possible name for a white YouTuber to have, Jesus. Now, I consider Charlie to be a good gaming YouTuber. I reject the accusation that he's a mindless slop-tuber just because he happens to upload every day. And he's a very talented Soulsborne gamer, having played and revisited From Software's games occasionally. And he's played other Souls-like games, especially Hollow Knight. Unfortunately, I gotta be honest with y'all, when it comes to fighting Gwyn, notably in this example, Charlie is a little less than remarkable, and it's not just simply because he's reluctant to utilize the parry here.
No, I'm putting the helmet on. If I'm fighting him solo, the helmet's staying. I'm going for the parry too, fuck it. Alright, that didn't work. Here comes the parry! Kidding.
The way Charlie went into Gwyn was almost like a speedrunner, minus the speedrunning, wanting to deal with such a formidable boss in a rush, except he summoned Solaire with the intent of letting him deal most of the damage to win, which backfired completely because Gwyn ended up manhandling Solaire as soon as he entered the arena.
Nah, oh my god. No! 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 Oh god!
Almost to the point of death until Charlie had to rush in to save Solaire from near death. You could say, well, at least he beat Gwyn in one match, but why not just join in the fight if you're gonna do jolly cooperation? And it's not like he doesn't have a strong sword going into Gwyn, as the Black Knight's sword is reliable on a base game run. Charlie has beaten Gwyn before with the parry.
I'm going for the parry too, fuck it. Alright, that didn't work.
Badly, albeit in this run back in 2020, he utilized pyromancies to repulse, specifically the Great Combustion spell, a very powerful pyromancy, useful for fights like Seath the Scaleless, but thematically for a Gwyn fight, it's kind of offensive to do to the Lord of Sunlight, like fighting fire with fire. Also, Charlie really needs to think about how he dresses up his redder-than-blood Chosen Undead. Man, let me tell you, Charlie's Chosen Undead looks are really cramping my style. Like, I get you need to worry about equipment load when rolling and flipping, but wear the pants, man. The point is, using Charlie's more recent example to finish Dark Souls, is that there is nothing wrong with doing summons while playing Dark Souls. I don't know if anyone gets that offended that a gamer is using summons to make boss fights easier, but whatever. However, if you're going to do summons and summon Solaire after having saved him from a maggoty death, and there are some pretty cool lore implications with this co-op fight, you need to, not stand back and let your summoned fighter perish just because you're afraid of dying. But in closing, and to be fair, despite yapping about his playstyle, at least there's an expectation for Charlie to practice and try different strategies. After all, I'm just as basic of a gamer as Charlie himself. However, let's now take a look and laugh at World of Warcraft veteran, far-right rodent, and actual real-life hollow, Zach Hoyt, aka Asmongold.
Okay, going this way.
A man so unhygienic and who lives so uncomfortably living in his unorganized and rotten home, even the undead rats in the depths wouldn't let him live down there. Oh, and Zach is pretty bad at Dark Souls and From Software games in general. In fact, Asmongold is so bad at Dark Souls, he makes Darkside Phil look like Michael Jordan.
Got him. Oh no! Yes! 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 Fuck you, you son of a bitch! You dumbass. I got him. That's it. Done. Done. Completely destroyed.
Like, I can't be the only one seeing this, right?
Holy fuck! Are you fucking serious?
Why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah, just, I mean...
Why am I doing this to myself, dude?
Anyway, regardless of how I feel about Zack as a person, or his rotten worldview and hygiene habits, his bad gameplay is what matters. And boy, it really isn't a meme. Zack definitely deserves those laughs, even if his laughing buddy on the other line is being friendly and encouraging during live streams.
No! No! No!
Fuck! Come on.
What the fuck
No.
are you doing?
Oh, okay, I'm dead. Fuck, dude!
Dude,
How the fuck do I play this game?
Dude, chill, man! Fuck! Damn!
Oh wow, Zack, you suck, buddy! Now, to be fair, I can empathize with his frustration. Just for a moment, as I too recently struggled to fight Gwyn while two-handing a Ushikatana without summoning Solaire during a New Game Plus run. And I just completely bombed over and over again, even as my sword had a Dark Moon Blade buff and or power within sometimes. Maybe it was the lack of experience fighting only two-handed without a sword, maybe it's a skill issue, but regardless of how frustrated I was losing to Gwyn over and over, it's important for me to remind myself that it wasn't the game's fault that I kept losing. This is on me. I'm saying this like a disappointed manager of a baseball team. The misery of being a New York Yankees fan at the current state of our franchise. Tangent aside, see, an honest gamer can admit defeat and say that they have to practice and try harder to win. But Zack doesn't seem that interested in spending time practicing how to be a better Soulsborne gamer, learning how to roll properly, knowing when to strike, and which piece of equipment is appropriate for this fight. For example, I noticed that before his second bout with Gwyn after he died the first time, Zack decided to equip the Calamity Ring, which you get after you have beaten Black Dragon Calamite, which, is pretty, Reading the Calamity Ring's description in the menu, it might seem counterproductive to equip this seemingly useless ring, since its one power is doubling the damage you take. But we have to put an asterisk on the word useless, because it turns out equipping the Calamity Ring, along with the Red Tearstone Ring, is actually not that thoughtless of a strategy, since the Red Tearstone Ring, which you can find in the Valley of Drakes, increases your attack damage by 50% when your HP is down 20%. Okay, that sounds really risky since Gwyn not only has quick attacks, but what happens if you also buff yourself with the power within Pyromancy and don't check your health? If you've beaten Petal and Leroy's Red Phantom while venturing the Tomb of the Giants, you're guaranteed to get his Sanctus Shield, which is one of the best shields in the game since it gradually increases your health and can slightly slow the damage from any of these buffs, putting aside that you need a faith level of 18 to use it. Basically, while Red Tearstone Ring is Fury of the Fallen before Fury of the Fallen was a thing, and is situational for cutting the time to fight bosses, this ring combination of the Red Tearstone and Calamity Rings would be sensible and make a great strategy going into a boss fight like Gwyn if the gamer were skilled enough and got enough damage from fighting the Black Knights before entering Gwyn's Fog Gate. I mean, I'm no glass cannon gamer, but it makes sense. But, to reiterate, it's not just a skill issue for Zack. It's a matter of not having thought about how to fight Gwyn, because rather than try to and practice new ways to play the game, like all the games Zack plays, he would prefer consuming Dark Souls like one of those big soda drinks he orders from a fast food place, only to leave the empty container up top of a giant pile of soda containers. That garbage in Zack's rooms looks awfully worse than all the people Aldridge consumed. Zack's primary weapon going into the final fight is a heavyweight for a strength build in Dark Souls, the Zweihander, which you can pick up as early as your first walk down the graveyard near Firelink Shrine, where all the medium and big skeletons will remind you it's not time to go to the catacombs yet. The Zweihander is an incredible early game weapon that does punishing damage, especially when two-handed. But my god, the wait times for each strike with this thing are worse than waiting at the DMV. I should know, because, full disclosure, the first ever divine weapon I had Andre of Astora forge and then took with me down into the catacombs was a Zweihander.
You fucking idiot. You stupid fucking idiot.
And even though it was doing damage and making sure the skeleton enemies wouldn't resurrect before resting at a bonfire, the time between when the sword goes down and when an enemy has a chance to attack while I'm midway in attack kept getting to me, and thus I just kept dying and dying on the way to Pinwheel before I even got to the wheel skeletons. So yes, my bias against the Zweihander is made clear, even though I recognize that it makes Dark Souls essentially easy mode, that and having the Black Knight Halberd. And yes, it's a weapon which can be buffed with miracles and or Ryzen, but the thing is, after having enough bouts with Gwyn and knowing how erratic and unpredictable his attacks can come at you, bringing a weapon like a Zweihander into the fight when you're playing New Game Plus and beyond is like bringing a knife into a gunfight when the Lord of Cinder is blazing you away. And Zack, rather than just level up a weapon slightly lighter like, say, a claymore, or take a cue from Charlie and use a Black Knight sword, hell, Zack literally acquired a Black Knight sword on his way to die repeatedly to Gwyn. Zack just goes into the Gwyn fight again and again and keeps fighting and dying again and again until finally he gets lucky, never to learn from his mistakes in future Soulsborne games.
That's bullshit. I hate this fucking game.
Lastly, in the interests of fairness, there's one person I want to point and laugh at during their first Gwyn fight on a new game file before moving on. Yours truly, Armchair Brain, the owner of this channel. By the way, there's your reminder to subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with future video game essays like this. Don't know why I didn't put that in the intro chapter, but enough of this channel plug. I have multiple game files on my Steam copy of Dark Souls Remastered, but despite starting this Chosen Undead journey with her having a Pyromancer build, I mostly use this run to master the game's sorceries, using very little pyromancies for boss fights, with the occasional use of the Power Within buffs, which boosts strength and endurance at the cost of draining the player's HP. However, for some ungodly reason, and I hate to repeat myself because this is such a petty issue to get worked up about, but my choice of armor was cramping my style. Like, my clothing going into the final fight was 3/4 the thief outfit, save for the gold-hemmed hood, because I was trying to be as lightweight as possible to be able to roll around without being naked. Of course, the first fight means bringing a weapon that can let Gwyn take significant damage, so an upgraded Black Knight Halberd was my weapon of choice, and it makes it easy to use for humanity to increase the chance of getting a Halberd drop with this Black Knight over here in Darkroot Basin on your way to fight the Hydra. But as this footage shows while fighting Gwyn, the Halberd is not ideal for two-handed attacks against such a quick opponent like him, since he can attack quickly if a two-handed strong attack is taking too long, or if you're chugging some flask and he pokes you while you're drinking. Seriously, this fight is the one fight where you're actively punished for trying to heal yourself, and I wanted this first fight with this build to be with weapons, no magic acquired, and I got lucky the first time with Gwyn, because I only needed to parry Gwyn twice, one to start the fight as he makes his giant leap, and the second to finally put him to rest, and a few strikes with the halberd in between, though I can't say it was completely successful since I still got hit. So, in short, I might suck at Dark Souls, but at least I'm not Asmongold. So we went over a few YouTubers and looked and laughed at how they fought Gwyn, but we still haven't answered the question, what is the right way to kill the Lord of Cinder? Another question we could ask before we attempt to answer this is how to practice against Gwyn. A good way of practicing the final Gwyn fight without a shield is something some gamers, and definitely speedrunners, don't do/avoid. Fighting the 5 Black Knights who come before Gwyn, either because they're worried they haven't leveled up their Estus flasks during their first run, and or regardless if their flasks are +7, they rather not waste all that precious drink while navigating the clean of the first flame. Let's look at those Black Knights for a moment. There are the 2 Black Knights with the Black Knight sword, the one Knight with a great sword after the first one, the Knight with a great axe who sometimes leaps where there's a gap in the staircase, and the knight with possibly the mother of all OG Dark Souls cheese mode weapons, the Black Knight Halberd. Again, reminder, this is a weapon you have a chance to get as early as your first trip to Darkroot Basin close to that Hydra in the lake with at least 4 humanity used. Although this is a hefty weapon for someone with a sorcerer build to use, as you need to level up to 32 in strength when upgraded to +5 and spending 10 Twinkling Titanite, this weapon could be your best friend in regular mode, especially for speedrunning. And, relevant to this video, if speedrunners are feeling lucky and want to break a record, and or maybe casual gamers who aren't playing New Game Plus mode, they will zoom right past these Black Knights while being naked and hollowing to make running and rolling easier with less equipment load, then enter the arena and immediately begin parrying and reposting Gwyn to death with a halberd, as shown in various YouTube speedruns of the game. However, and I gotta be honest about this, I never liked this approach to the Gwyn fight. I respect speedrunners who are talented enough to do it. Lord knows I am definitely not the greatest expert on video game speedrunning. But even if this strategy is being done on a casual playthrough, doing nothing but parrying Gwyn feels wrong. Not just because it removes the excitement of gearing up for a final showdown, but in the context of the game's universe. For a being who's conquered dragons, he deserves at least one more good fight before being given the old Yeller treatment. Which is funny since we're talking about the ethics of fighting a fictitious god who's become hollow and moves almost exactly like countless weaker hollows before. For example, I once beat Gwyn doing nothing but parrying and reposting Gwyn during a New Game Plus run while half naked with stamina, recovery, speed, buff equipment like the Mask of the Child and the Grass Crest Shield, and it was one of the most boring fights ever. Ever. Nothing exciting happens and you have to be extremely close to him to do this while avoiding the chance he either tries to kick or grab you. Fighting Gwyn like this is almost like plowing him with nothing but dark bead or extremely powerful pyromancies. There's nothing truly spicy about fighting this way. Let's compare fighting Gwyn for a moment to an especially noted case of an extremely satisfying and great final boss fight, the Radiance in Hollow Knight, or her Absolute Radiance form, or Absrad for short, in the game's Pantheon of Hollowness or in Godseeker mode. Yeah, I know, it's far off to compare a 2D Metroidvania Souls-like game to an actual Soulsborne game, but fuck it. Hollow Knight was inspired by Dark Souls, so there you go. There are multiple ways to approach the Radiance in Hollow Knight's Dream No More ending. Hollow Knight gamers going into this fight for the first time can attack her and make this fight quicker using the powerful Abyss Shriek spell, an upgraded version of the spell Howling Wraith, and which is even more powerful when equipping charms like Shaman Stone, which boosts spell attacks, and Spell Twister, which reduces the amount of soul used for each spell. But after enough times finishing Hollow Knight and comparing Absrad in P5 to The Rad, it is painfully clear that Absrad is just a faster paced version of The Radiance, at least for her first 4 stages. God, I always struggle with that fucking climb. It might be a more cinematic fight, but it's laughable to play the Radiance in her default mode after having finished P5 multiple times and going hitless to get the Dream No More ending. The Radiance is so slow compared to Absrad, I don't even bother with spells anymore. I just use my Pure Nail and Nail Arts while taking little to no damage. Gwyn in Dark Souls, on the other hand, isn't as godly as the Radiance. Well, because he's hollow, nor is he especially buffed up in New Game Plus mode apart from a health boost. But it is more appropriate to compare Gwyn to Absrad, at least in how they attack when compared to other enemies, because Gwyn is just a faster, more deadly hollow than the other hollows you've already encountered, revealing that there's vulnerability in his moveset, besides parrying, and takes away a little bit of the feeling of being intimidated. But how exactly to approach Gwyn? Well, from my experience, there are 2 ways, and no, I am not including magic, pyromancy, or miracles, apart from these shown here on the screen, despite Gwyn being pretty vulnerable to magic. We'll go over these strategies now. A very important and useful skill to learn early on in Dark Souls is the parry with your shield, which makes several of the game's enemies stagger for a few seconds. You know, that L2 button on your controller below the L1 button that you need to press quickly, or with mouse and keyboard, pressing the left mouse button and the shift key simultaneously, which half of the time I'm off by a millisecond. And during that short time, the player has a chance to follow up with a riposte afterwards, simply pressing R1 while they're staggered. The parry and riposte method can make great use of early weapon attacks in regular new game mode. Think, for a moment, if you have a sorcerer build on regular mode honing in on magic, yet you need to keep at least one light weapon around, like say a short sword or a long sword, and reinforce it. The best way to start practicing parrying is in the early stage of gameplay, once you get a useful shield against the hollows in the Undead Asylum and Undead Burg. These hollows have predictable attacks with obvious visual cues as to when and how they're going to attack you, and they always resurrect after resting at a bonfire, so not only can you get some good practice, but hey, you could probably do some soul farming just for a little bit until it takes too long to level up your soul level. Soul farming is better suited for these giants in Andor Londo or the Phalanx in the Painted World. The hollows in the Undead Burg, Parish, and Asylum become a joke as you advance in the game, but don't think that they can't kill you, especially once you get to New Game Plus and beyond. Even novice gamers can be taken aback by some of their attacks, like this one hollow move called a Quick Barrage, where they just swing their broken straight sword erratically and make you panic. But there are cues for when they're going to do this, and sometimes a hollow can leave. Boy, wonder if that's relevant. Sometimes done by this one guy on top of a staircase near Firelink Shrine, which makes this the best time to press that L2 button. And full disclosure, I know I might get some heat for this, but I personally think the sound effects for parrying and riposte in Dark Souls are the best in the entire series. Maybe even the best from Software, because it sounds like you're riposting the hollowing out of them when doing it with this awesome riposte sound effect. Which, by the way, sounds like the one from Demon Souls. The Dark Souls 2 parrying sound effect is fine, I guess? And the Dark Souls 3 ones are a little much. I realize Dark Souls 3 might be some gamers' favorite as I type this. Apologies in advance. All three of these games are great, by the way. As stated in the second chapter, the game doesn't just build Gwyn's legend, it builds up that Gwyn is a more powerful version of these previous hollows, which you have gotten used to, and do more damage for every New Game Plus mode you enter up until plus 7. And being the only boss in the game who can be parried, you could try to just stand there and hit the L2 button in response to one of his slashes, or maybe in between a combo. Of course, the trick is timing, but also being able to limit physical and fire damage in between trying to parry is crucial. That is not to say his slashes are all you have to worry about if you're going to be this close. You can't parry Gwyn's kick, which he occasionally does, and Gwyn's grab attack is the one attack that is the most dangerous one in his arsenal, as you can't get out of the grab once he's got you. While there is a delay between its start and when he actually grabs you, being too close to make a roll away or while you're attacking him means him taking away a good chunk of your health. Heck, I even got nervous when he grabbed Solaire during a summoned final fight, and I panicked for a bit, rushing in to prevent him from dying. Kinda reminds me of that one-sided fight Moist Critical was doing during his replay-through of Dark Souls. Like I said in the last chapter, all I had to do was parry and riposte Gwyn twice during this first run in a new game while producing this video essay. The first parry when he makes that huge leap towards you, which I would argue is a key moment in the fight, as he'll tell me whether or not I'm prepared for the rest of the fight. And the second parry is done to finally let him rest. I did get him one other parry in between, though I could only slash him once I stunned him. But after this first fight and recording footage in New Game Plus modes 2 to 7, I ultimately decided against parrying him all of the time, and stick to using a sword, and if I was going to parry him, it would be the very first jump he makes after you enter the arena, for the reason I described a minute ago. Despite my reluctance to rely on parrying Gwyn to make this fight special and unique, I have to admit, Parrying and reposting is a pretty convenient way to deal with him quickly and with little risk. However, after finishing the game numerous times, I find myself hungry for a more challenging fight, something that would feel rewarding, and, for better or worse, would cost me several hours and humanities to spend because, as most Dark Souls gamers know, they don't have to parry the Lord of Cinder at all, at their own risk. So we know parrying Gwyn is easier than it looks, like super easy to do with hundreds of hours played, and thematically it makes the fight more tragic that he cannot fight at his peak state. But perhaps the trickiest way to defeat Gwyn without being tempted to use your shield to parry his greatsword attacks is to forego using heavy weapons like a Black Knight halberd, like a buck-naked hollowing speedrunner might. Or, and again I advise against this, a Zweihander while making strategic use of your stamina if you've leveled up enough before reaching the game's conclusion. With the more I've played Dark Souls, the more I realize that the most important stat for boss fights isn't vitality or strength, not even intelligence or faith if you're like me and prefer the magic route and or do a little miracles every now and then. No, for boss fights the most important stat is endurance, the stat which, when leveled up, increases your stamina and the total weight of equipment you can carry, and which determines if you can roll smoothly, or in Dark Souls gamer speak, fat roll, or for being extreme, poop walk. Let me put it this way, if you charge at any given boss in the game, like say one of the Bell Gargoyles or Smoke, and give them two-handed swing with your best reinforced sword, yet your stamina depleted and needing to be recharged, that might leave you open to any given attack without the chance to roll away, keep that in mind. And having enough endurance as a skill is key to the Gwyn fight without a shield because, as stated, it increases your stamina, aka that green bar below the red HP bar. And since Gwyn is a lot quicker than he appears even when you try to heal yourself with Estus flask drinks after each parry and repose, there is still a chance he can respond by quickly slashing you away. Player actions in the game like jumping, running, fighting, rolling, and yes, parrying, use up stamina, but since we're not going to parry Gwyn during this fight, we replace the action of parrying with rolling. Rolling is a strategy we can use to limit the damage without a shield, even if it's risky trying to avoid each fiery strike. You can practice this early in the game or in New Game Plus by trying it out against any Black or Silver Knight, and either rolling away from their strikes or roll directly in front of them if you can. You can even try practicing with some early game bosses like Orstein or the Capra Demon. That is, after you dispose those two damn dogs. And remember, you can level up to 40 in endurance to make sure your stamina is maxed out, if you can, but you can't go above that, only the equip load will be raised. But okay, what is the right way to win this non-parrying way? Personally, I think the riskiest way to beat him, as I am trying to describe here, was done years ago in the original version of the game by whoever runs the channel Boss Fight database, where they fought him using a dinky little lightning spear and the fight took over 3.5 minutes to complete. Because, you know, Gwyn's hollowed sure, but also the Lord of Sunlight getting attacked by lightning is like shooting a water gun at a waterfall. Because lightning is Gwyn's one resistance. Like, it's funny that this beefed up chosen undead wearing parts of Havel's armor and Smoke's helm is just roly-polying around the arena while giving Gwyn a lightning poke every now and then in between heavily drinking the Estus flask. A total contrast from my first time fighting him with a Black Knight halberd and shield to parry him twice. That last part is important to note in this example because at no point does this YouTuber use their shield, despite the shield being right there on the chosen undead's back. So I asked myself, with what has been previously said in this chapter and before, how would I ideally beat Gwyn without falling to the temptation of using a shield for protection from those quick fiery greatsword slashes? Well, if Gwyn is going to go into the fight with that weapon, then my chosen undead should come with a weapon that is effective not just in single-handed slashes, but also two-handed attacks, one which can be temporarily buffed with miracles like Sunlight or Dark Moon Blade, preferably the latter for me, to increase the damage and slightly even up the fight if he's gonna try to blaze me away. We already know that a Claymore is a fantastic weapon which can be acquired early in the game at the bridge leading to the Undead Parish, not only because it can be buffed, but when it's upgraded normally to plus 15 after using a Titanite slab, it is one of the most powerful weapons with an incredible moveset. And my initial choice for a sword going into Gwyn was the Uchigatana. A katana weapon you can get from either killing the undead merchant in the undead burg, or buying it from Shiva of the East for 5,000 souls while he's at Blighttown, which I did like 12 or 15 times in various playthroughs just so I can have different kinds of the same katana for different situations. So I had Chaos, Crystal, Divine, Enchanted, Fire, Lightning, Magic, Occult, and Raw kinds of the same katana sword. I debated with myself over which katana in Dark Souls 1 I would be most comfortable with in finishing the game with each New Game Plus mode again and again, as I wasn't a fan of the Iaito, and I just was not feeling the washing pole, as it was too big for my kind of katana. As I practiced toying with the Uchigatana against the Black Knights of the Kiln of the First Flame, I found I was comfortable rolling away from them before they would attack with their respective weapons with enough endurance, and while there's a delay in the weapon's two-handed R2 attack leaving you open to enemy attacks, they can do some nice damage between that and parrying them, especially with an occult Uchigatana, since this modification deals special damages to Black Knights. However, despite some practice at the kiln with the Black Knights, the first couple of times I tried to go into Gwyn without using a shield to block damage was a fucking disaster. Like, I had no idea what I was doing and tried rolling away from him, only for him to zoom in and slash me once or twice, and while drinking flask, I would get damaged again. Eventually, I caved in and conceded to parrying his first running jump attack, then switching to two-handing the Uchigatana, and panicked again at his speed before dying. Keep in mind, this was being done without the HUD on to make the fight look more cinematic. It's weird because I was comfortable two-handing the Black Knight Halberd the first time around while parrying with my chosen undead on regular mode, and I managed to stagger Gwyn, but in the next couple of New Game Plus fights I took for granted his hollowed form and got too comfortable. Feeling overwhelmed in New Game Plus 5, I conceded to doing nothing but parrying him to death with my Uchigatana, annoyed with my disappointing outing and needing a fresh start in New Game Plus 6. So while playing through a Dark Lord New Game Plus 6 run, I kept thinking and rethinking about my strategy for the inevitable Gwyn rematch, and one of the things I did was being forced to compromise on not trying out a bigger sword. I was already digging the Claymore in previous runs and had already beaten Gwyn with one, but I was worried that the Claymore wouldn't be as useful the more New Game Plus runs I would play. And I knew I wasn't a fan of the Zweihander, but I still felt like I should try out a larger sword. A great sword. In fact, you could say I decided on trying out the Great Sword, cause, you know, that's the name of the sword, which you can buy from the Crestfallen Merchant in Sen's Fortress for 8,000 souls each, and or off Iron Tarkus's corpse in Andor Londo if you summoned him for the Iron Golem fight. A potential downside to collecting rare weapons in Dark Souls like the Moonlight Greatsword, the Black Knight Greatsword, the Great Lord Greatsword, and other weapons is that some of these weapons can be purely situational, like the Moonlight Greatsword, which, while it's great to earn once you chomped off Cease's tail, is a sword which might be ideally reserved for magic runs, and swords like the Great Lord Greatsword can have temporary enhancements, not even Pine Raisin. The Greatsword, on the other hand, can have Raisin put on them, and can have buffs like the Sunlight or Dark Moon Blade Miracles, or even Crystal Magic Weapon. And sure, it's a little heavier than the Zweihander, and needs more strength to hold, but when upgraded to its max with a Titanite slab, it deals 325 max physical damage. Of course, having acquired and or bought multiple great swords after a few New Game Plus runs, I would need to try out various upgrades, like the Uchigatana, so I took a risk and upgraded one of my great swords to a Crystal Greatsword, ideal for a glass cannon run, because you know, it's more fragile than a regular greatsword, because of course, like other crystal upgraded weapons, you can't repair them at a bonfire or by a blacksmith, and the only way to repair them temporarily is to enforce them. But when a Crystal Greatsword is upgraded to plus 5, it deals 351 max physical damage according to this chart, the most for any Greatsword upgrade, and this is not including strength or dex leveling up and or temporary buffs. As it turned out, despite a massive downside in fighting with such a delicate weapon, having to compromise and hold a greatsword paid off. Oh, and there was one more compromise I made when deciding to non-parry Gwyn, and that is I would summon arguably the game's most optimistic character, Solaire of Astora. Solaire as a bright character in such a dark world is worth his own video essay, but to keep this brief before wrapping up, choosing to save Solaire from going insane from a sunlight maggot and then summoning him to fight alongside you against Gwyn puts this final boss fight in a whole new light, putting aside that it obviously makes the fight easier as Solaire can serve as a nice distraction while you sneak up on Gwyn with two-handed attacks. With this warrior of sunlight by your side until the end, you're not just fighting for what will come next for Lord Ron, but what Solaire will do next in his world. Throughout his storyline, in talking to him in the Undead Burg, the Sunlight Altar, and Andor Londo, Solaire is trying to seek his son, and thus, unlike a majority of NPCs in the game, he doesn't go hollow even while being one of two NPCs to go insane, the other being Big Hat Logan when his quest is wrapped up in the Duke's archives. And even here, Solaire freely admits his insanity.
Forgive me, I was just pondering about my poor fortune. I did not find my own son, not in Anor Londo, nor in Twilight Blighttown. Where else might my son be? Lost Izalith? Or the tomb of the Grave Lord? But I cannot give up. I became undead to pursue this. But when I peer at the sun up above, it occurs to me, what if I am seen as a laughingstock? As a blind fool without reason? Well, I suppose they wouldn't be far off.
And Solaire would almost seem to be a fool in this world, as the fact that the aforementioned city of Andor Londo, being a location where the sun shines like it's the most beautiful afternoon day in such a doomed world, is actually a fiction after striking the giant princess Guinevere, who, along with the sun, an illusion created by Gwynolin, the Dark Sun's son of Gwyn, to make people believe the gods have not abandoned Lord Ron due to the flame nearly going out. This, along with Solaire's trek down into the demon ruins in Lost Izalith, not only makes saving Solaire demonstrably the right thing to do, regardless of how you build your character, but also having Solaire fight with you against Gwyn might be part of the right way to fight Gwyn, as stated from the words of the game's director in an interview from way back. Going back to Solaire, it's really a secret, and I think that the happiest ending for him is to die by becoming the sun. He's happy, he becomes the sun. If you kill the red-eyed sunlight maggot, he can fight with you at the last boss, and after that, he will light the fire in his own world. Suffice to say, I don't feel any regret about fighting with the decorated warrior of sunlight, as it teaches me to be comfortable without relying on my shield to parry and avoid damage, and I can instead rely on a decent endurance build and some stamina buffs to ensure I can keep up with the fight. Though, that doesn't mean I mind fighting solo if I am forced to. And maybe in the future there will be a solo fight which really sticks out to me, as a personal gaming highlight that I can point to and say, see, I didn't parry there. The only minor drawback to fighting this way, regardless of whether you summon Solaire or not, is, well, it might be a longer fight without parrying, and obviously so because you're spending time dancing and rolling around waiting to see when to strike him next and avoid damage. Funny enough, practicing fighting the 5 Black Knights and then doing the Gwyn fight without a shield got me prepped up for two-handed sword combat going into Dark Souls 3 and parts of Dark Souls 2, since I was getting too comfortable relying on a magic build to get me through the first game, and I wanted to try a different route. In fact, fighting the Lord of Cinder himself without a shield or parrying is a nice warm-up for getting ready to fight the Soul of Cinder in Dark Souls 3. You know, because the second phase of that fight is just peak Gwyn but with lightning attacks. Yippee! Then again, maybe I am wrong about suggesting this, and you might have a more creative strategy for Gwyn. Or you know, you just prefer a Parry Party. Dark Souls is a legendary video game, and the game's events and conclusion leave a lot of room for interpretation and theory, even after almost 15 years from its initial release, with some lore questions having been settled, some laughs to be had thanks to the game's glitches and player screw-ups, and the game's incredible world building, atmosphere, and soundtrack. However, after writing this script and finishing putting together this video essay trying to answer the final boss question in the video's title, I still feel like I don't know the answer because, as shown in several examples, there is not one true answer, not one true way to quote-unquote win Gwyn. Then again, the beauty of Dark Souls is that you can beat him or any of the game's bosses however you want. I might not have the definitive answer to my own question, but let me know in the comments what you think about Dark Souls, Gwyn as a final boss, if and how you beat him, what is your preferred method for defeating him and other bosses, and thank you for watching. Okay, so let me start off this outro segment by sincerely apologizing for the delay in getting this one out. I intended for this essay to premiere on the channel in late December of 2025 and or at the latest mid-January, but not only was I having a lot of fun playing Dark Souls on my Steam Deck and Nintendo Switch 2, but on a medical note, I have been dealing with a severe case of sciatica which started 2 weeks ago as I write this. I won't go into the details here, but suffice to say I am trying to avoid surgery and do conservative treatments at the moment, but that could change in between now and a few weeks or months. However, no matter what happens, I will continue to work on production even while managing the pain and getting needed rest when it's necessary. Anyway, this is the part where I tell you if you enjoyed this video essay, please hit the like button, leave a comment below, share this essay elsewhere on social media. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the Armchair Brain YouTube channel, and if you want to support the production on video essays like this, please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page and or leaving me coffee money by supporting my Ko-fi page to ensure I'm caffeinated while writing scripts. So, as I posted on my Patreon page earlier, the game plan for the big boy video essays is to premiere 2 video essays on a Friday and Saturday in the not too distant future, and finally put out the second Forever Freddy video essay covering Five Nights at Freddy's 2, followed by the 3rd episode of my Disco Elysium skill analysis series, which covers the psych skill Inland Empire, and I know a lot of Disco Elysium gamers are going to find that next episode to be a pretty contentious one given some of the comments on the first 2 episodes. I have also decided to do the same for the drama and pain threshold episodes in that latter series, which would be episodes 4 and 5, intended to release in the springtime or early summer if necessary. Obviously, this is a lot of work for me to do on this channel, given the medical circumstances, but I am trying to put out more videos this year. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.